Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kish,
And I'm Troy Norcross.
and we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
So, Marcus, there have been so many things that have happened during lockdown that I've been unable to change to kind of get back to normal. And you, my good friend, have been able to run not one, but two actual marathons during this entire time. I'm at least going out in the morning 3 times a week, trying to do a bit more of jogging and running and exercise. I'll never get to where you are, but I'm at least trying.
Which is all you have to do. Do the 20 minutes, half an hour. Actually, it's smarter to do that 2 or 3 times a week than to run a marathon and really damage yourself. That's just me being weird. Or yeah, I don't know. I'll still try to do it because what I love is actually not. It's maybe less about running the marathon on a day. It's actually more about you have 3 to 4 months of training,
Mm.
and then you have a plan. And then every morning you go out, you have a plan, and you have consistency, and it helps a lot with your mental state. You're really focused. You have also time to think while you're running, especially when you start running longer and longer. I think that is actually more appreciative than actually running it in the end. It's definitely fun finally trying it because when you're training, you never fully run it, but then you finally run it, and it's quite a thing to force yourself through, and you never know what's going to happen.
And
But
you are
consistency is great.
telling a story about your journey, which leads me nicely to ask who's on the program today.
So today we have Ken Pasternak with us and his book Exploding Turkeys and Spare Trousers: Adventures in Global Business, which is a beautiful collection of stories from business along his long career. What were your takeaways?
Um, I think it was really, really nice to talk to him. Of course, he and I have a number of different things in common, both being outside Americans, being Americans living abroad. Both of us having had time in Helsinki, so that was quite good and interesting. I loved that we had a brief chat about storytelling and the art of storytelling and how important it was, and where we both got our starts on storytelling. And I think it's important in business and in leadership and in marketing to be able to tell good stories. The other one was his conversation about the importance of resilience or grit and the challenges in spotting new employees and trying to decide will they have that level of resilience, but also the other side of the huge demand today for mental health and well-being to be able to maintain resilient teams. So those were my big takeaways, but I won't give any more away because we'll let the listeners hear the details. What about you? What were your takeaways?
Yeah, my main one was the one between people and money, right? So you might think you have all the money in the world and be able to hire the best people ever, or you're not, or you don't have the money, and then you think, oh, I can hire the people I need, and I'm in trouble and I can't do anything. And money has never been a differentiator. As maybe this year, Meta, the company, will show. Sorry. But essentially, there's a famous historical story as well about the brothers Wright who finally managed to develop a flying thing. Um, at the same time, there was a team doing the same thing, so that there was a race to build the first machine that can actually fly a certain amount of length of, kind of thing. That was highly funded, had all the money, some really famous specialists, and they weren't getting anywhere because they had different incentives. There was other things that those individuals had at stake, and it just didn't work at all. So, very great example where money just didn't make a difference. Um, and I find that a lot in organizations as well, where it doesn't matter if you're HSBC or if you're the NHS. HSBC having billions to spend and NHS being strapped for money and time. They're both equally capable to either do or don't. It That's what it comes down to, and I think that was my greatest story to hear because I know that back when I was doing art, I was running on shoestring budgets, doing really weird technical stuff that everyone told me, "Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's not doable." and definitely not with your budget. And I managed to pull things off on minimal budgets and effort. Not minimal effort, a lot of effort, minimal budgets. And then I entered, the non-profit and profit organizational space, and I was amazed how people with 5 to 10 times the budget couldn't do the same thing.
I think a lot of times I tell startups having too much money is almost a bigger curse than not having enough, because not having enough money drives you harder and makes you make harder choices faster.
Yeah, and I think it's also it removes the focus from people, and you know, Ken, probably because similar age, I guess, reminded me of having Tom Peters on one of our first episodes, and those guys have decades of experiences. I think Ken at some point mentioned George Soros having a meeting with
Yes.
him, and you go, okay, that's a name drop. Um, Essentially, they've seen this for decades. They know it's about people, not about anything else. Organizations' purpose, I think Tom Peters said it, organizations' main purpose should be to grow people and what they do
And
and what you
before we
can.
give away too much of our rambling, talking amongst ourselves of our own
Okay.
great ideas, let's go talk to Ken.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code Wicked Podcast. I repeat, Wicked Podcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Ken Pasternak. Hi, Ken. Thank you for joining us all the way from Finland, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you both.
So, as usual, we start at the top. So, please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
Okay, well, as you might hear from my accent, I was born in America, lived there, grew up there, but in 1980 I moved abroad and never moved back to the States. I lived in London, Paris, Brussels, Istanbul, and Helsinki, as you said, where I'm speaking to you from where I'm speaking now. Um, I started my career in banking with Citibank and spent 18 years with Citibank, but not always doing corporate banking. I was doing project management. I was even in a department in Citibank doing consulting for other banks. But after 18 years, I joined a bank called the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London, which was created in 1991 to assist the transition of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union into market economies. And there, I was actually running a department that was doing programs to build banking schools and business schools in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. 1996, for various reasons, I moved back to Finland with my Finnish family. And I've been, for the last 25 years, based here doing consulting, executive education, speaking engagements around working with organizations to improve their performance through visionary leadership, through building effective teams, through understanding cross cultural communication and the like. And it's that background and that experience of many, many years working internationally that brought me to the idea to write the book. It really started during the COVID lockdown period when I was working with a group that I've become a part of called the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches Group. And we agreed to start posting once a week on LinkedIn. In those days, it was 1,300 characters limit. Some articles, some stories, some ideas, some thoughts. And I was really at a loss to how I can participate until my daughter said, "You're always telling war stories. And when you're speaking in groups, when you're teaching about your experiences, why don't you just start doing that?" And once I started, it flowed. Once a week, I'd tell a story and try to include what did I learn from that, or what can someone else take away from that experience to help them become a better leader or just a better person. And the group reinforced these stories. They added their comments, and they encouraged me to continue, and eventually encouraged me to suggesting that I collect them and put them into a book. So the book includes 53 short stories, each with a life lesson or a business lesson for leaders in any types of business anywhere in the world. And maybe 20 of them were from my LinkedIn stories, and the rest were stories which flowed just when I got the pump started. It just kept coming. So that's the background of the book. And it's really just collecting true life stories. Everything that's in the book happened to me or I experienced, and I've been happy to share it.
Lovely. And yeah, it's interesting because some of it, just because I've just been on email with one of our very first guests that we were so lucky to have, Tom Peters, and he sort of has a similar kind of a long history of experiences in so many organizations, and there's similar themes as well there. You know, when which is always nice to hear, because you learn that if you talk to the people who've been around in lots of different places and have a lot of different stories, the themes are similar, and what's important is similar. And so one of the themes I want to ask you about is and it's sort of everywhere, and then it gets ignored a lot as much as it still pops up everywhere, which is sort of the theme of helping rather than managing. And
Mm.
if I look at the last projects in particular since COVID, there's a high push to just manage harder. Yet you can tell people actually need more help rather than being told and having decisions being taken away from them. What's your view, or what are some of your stories that you've seen around
Yeah,
that?
well, the term servant leader has been around for a long time, and it really embodies finding ways to help develop the capability of others. And that's what leadership really should be about, is helping people reach their potential for the good and the common good and the common viewpoints and visions that you may share. So leadership has long changed, hopefully, from command and control to leaders taking a position where they're encouraging others to learn, to grow, and helping them do that. And there is a tendency, I think, in difficult times, perhaps COVID is one of those, to fall back on a behavior which says, do it, just do it. And as opposed to let's learn and work together, and I'll work with you and encourage you to take accountability and be responsible. But the trend is really there, that more and more leaders understand that the way to get people to perform better is not to tell them what to do, but to help them learn how to do it better, more efficiently. And that's what leadership should be about.
So I've been listening to this podcast in the mornings when I go for a run sometimes, and it was a particularly poignant episode. It was a book about the whole kind of stock market manipulation that was happening via Reddit and the application called Robinhood.
Mm-hmm.
And they kept talking about the fact that these people were just playing the stock market as if they were playing a game. And they really didn't really care if they won or if they lost, because nothing mattered. There is no actual kind of benefit or value behind the companies. It's just a narrative. It's just a story. It's all just a game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's a whole generation of millennials or Gen Zoomers, whatever they're calling themselves these days, that are coming up, that are largely disaffected with the way things have been up to this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
As leaders trying to bring those people into corporations need to change to accept these new ideas and also adapt to the new workforce. How can you kind of guide leaders, or what information do you give to leaders around that? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's not related to a story per se, but just share some of your insights.
Well, I think it starts from values. If you read a book on strategy, it'll tell you come up with a vision and a mission and so on and so forth. When I've worked with leaders and organizations, I say, let's start from values. What do we stand for? What's important to us? And how are we going to behave and act in alignment with those values, not just put them on a sign or use the words. And when you start from values, everything flows from that because it's easy to make decisions about what's right and what's wrong, or what's good or what's not so good, if you conform to those values. And working with disaffected youth is an issue because we're living in a very complicated world. We're living in a very polarized world, and business works not apart from the environment around it. So we're all getting, enmeshed in our cultures, in our maybe bubbles where we only hear and reinforce information that we like to hear, and that's a problem. So what organizations need to do is come up with the values, live those values in everything they do, from hiring to teaching and promoting and operating with their clients, and they should drive the way the business is done. Uh, what's clear is that the younger generations need a purpose. So along with values, you need to make clear, why does this company exist? And everything the company does should lead to fulfilling that vision and that mission and that purpose. And if you're tied to a purpose and you have values that are consistent with what people want to believe in and operate under, then you can find a path forward which is comfortable and not, in opposed to, what's going on in the world around you. Make
How
sense?
absolutely. And my follow-up question to that, because I'm pulling in merely things from from some of the meetings I had, project I'm involved to literally today, is that's all nice. However, so when things are the way they are, which is a lot of pressure, a lot of stuff to do, 1,000 things to do on your backlog, you're in the middle of it. It's
Mm,
easy to lose sight of maybe the values and the things because you want to fix the thing that's right in front of you, and you might just not
mm,
have anyone around that reminds you of that, and it's not
mm,
ingrained in the day-to-day process to live up to that every day because things have just got very complicated, and there's just a new story that came out, so you're having to face that. So there's a lot at stake
mm,
here, and time is of the essence. How do you how do you how do you best sort of maintain that then? How do you pull things back? Because most projects I walk into are, have a full backlog and lots of things to do. Too many things to worry about.
mm,
Hard to prioritize. So there's always everything needs to be done. And the question always is, how do we pull back from that? Because that's an ongoing thing. And in theory, if you run well, even a good organization,
mm,
you're busy anyway. You're also busy
mm,
to capacity, right? You're as effective as you can
mm,
be. So there's never any time to spare really to step back and hang on a
mm,
second. Why we're here?
mm.
What's your view on being able to sort of pull back or remind yourself back or
Yeah.
not lose that once
Well,
it's established?
two things. Firstly, is going back to that point of clarity of purpose. Is what I am doing and I'm running around doing really lead us to why we exist and what we're trying to accomplish as an organization for our employees, for our shareholders, for our customers. But the question you're raising is, how do you ask yourself that question? Because you're in the rat race, you're in, on the treadmill trying to get things done. There's two things about leadership that are very, really clear. One is that it's hard, and two, that it can be very lonely. And what I advocate and feel very strongly about is that every leader at all levels of an organization should have someone who's a counterpart, who's an objective, as objective as possible, to a person to assist them in thinking things through and as a sounding board. The executive coaching world has ballooned and has become huge. Maybe some people are calling themselves executive coaches and they're perhaps not truly qualified to be so, but it's a huge industry now. But the reason is every person running a business at all levels of that business uh, could use a coach. And if you look at how great athletes perform, there's not one great athlete who deals with the pressures, the physical pressures, the mental pressures, who doesn't have some form of coach, and maybe several coaches. Coaches for the technical side of their activity, coaches for the mental side of their activity. So, to answer your question, I think one of the best things that someone can do if they find themselves being very stressed, unable to cope with the demands and the pace, is to try to find a coach who they can meet with once a week, once a month, whatever makes sense. And it could be virtual. So much of this is done virtually nowadays to help them think through where they are, where they're going, why they're doing what they're doing. So having someone to bounce ideas off of, whether it's internally or externally, is the way to go.
And what a sidebar is, I've got a friend who is actually a classically trained and certified therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and he deals with a lot of entrepreneurs. And they all say, "Oh, I don't need a therapist. What I need is a coach." So he stopped branding himself as a therapist and started branding himself as a coach. And he's doing exactly the same thing he would normally do as a therapist, but he's doing it under the label of a coach. So I think it's really insightful on his part to meet the market demand that he's got and do so in a creative way. But that's a small segue.
No, no, but it's a good point because executive coaches don't know the technology behind what their clients are doing. They may know something about the industry, but they're there to help with the emotional side, the management side. How do you deal with this kind of employee? Or how do you deal with the fact that getting a divorce, or your wife is sick, or you're sick, or your child is sick, but you still have to come to work every day? And it's that kind of support which is extremely important. And I think, well, as we just said, the industry is booming
It
because
is.
the need is there.
Yeah.
So hold on. The question I was going to move on to on the back of that is there's this word that's been bandied around in the last 3 years, even got a pre-COVID, and it's grit. And
Mhm.
they keep looking for people who have grit. And in the book, you talk about resilience
Mm.
and how do you figure out who has resilience and how do you help teams build resilience? That's the question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, and that's a tough one to answer because each of us come at stressful situations with our own set of baggage and our own experience. And some people, as you know, can head into tough situations and stand up and get it done, and others not so good. What I've found is there is great um, comfort and great help when you do have a team working on a problem. And even when it's an individual dealing with a need to be resilient, and they were knocked down for whatever reason, it's very hard for them to do it themselves. So I'm back to what I said a little bit earlier about finding another individual or a set of individuals, your teammates in the office, or someone outside, a coach or a therapist, if you really need that, to help you get up and move forward again. It's so hard to do it on your own. You lose perspective. You don't get all the stimulation and the insights that someone from outside can help you with. The story I tell in the book is when the EBRD, when in its early days, was in a location in London where there was a bombing, the IRA bombing, and we were knocked out of our offices. And it really set us all back at a time when we were just trying to get started. And I think the resilience that we came together in hotel rooms, trying to do the best we can with communications to our future clients and to our colleagues, was we had each other to support one another. We spurred each other on. tried to create a little sense of humor about the difficulties we were facing. Um, on our own, that would have been more difficult. But as a group, there were about 6 or 8 of us who came together and found ways to move forward until we can move back in and everything was normalized.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it's more common. It's funny because in our line of work we're quite used to we've done remote working for much longer than a lot of people pre-COVID.
Hmm.
Um, in change and transformation, we're always thrown into the deep end of where things change all the time. There's always high pressure. There's always lots of stuff to do. There's always lots of new things, new people, and so on. I gotten quite into the habit of doing that, once a week. If we have a team, when high pressure, actually to after everything's done in the week or after we've gone through the week, not that everything's always ever done, but to ask like how are we doing? Do you feel okay? Do you feel confident? Anything else going on outside of work that you need a break on or something? And I had some really really tragic and intense stories there where we had a team member who one of his best friends died while we were in the middle of a 1 year project, and you go, okay, well, let's quickly talk about it. Do you need some time out, or what do you want to do? And to his account, he was like, look, I want to keep working. Can I just keep coming to work because I want to get my head out of that and just focus on work? So we were definitely checking in with him a lot to make sure that he's okay, and he managed to actually keep working, and it helped him enough to get through it. But those are the kind of moments where you go, I've now been in a lot of other projects over the last 2 years, and I haven't always found quite as much that on the other end or in a lot of other places, and watching managers do that. And it's at best of times you get sort of a sprint agile review, after 2 weeks, and you go, hey, are we still do we still want to work the way we work? So that's as far as it goes. It doesn't go to the real personal thing where you go, are we happy with this? Are we okay? And that's a bit of a shame. And being in the middle probably of a mental health pandemic by itself,
Yeah.
it's a serious thing that people need to pick up. But before I keep rambling on for too much, maybe I should ask a question, shouldn't I?
Well, let me pop in. Think of your
Yes,
question, but
please.
when I was in front of groups, and for 1 week I'm teaching all day long. Every once in a while, I would take a break, and I'd say, "Put up your hand. How are you feeling? 1 to 5. 5 being great, 1 being not so great." And it was taking the temperature of the room, even when it was face to face, because you're out there, you're tired, you're working hard to transfer knowledge, you're trying to keep people engaged. And remote working is even more difficult. Taking the temperature of the people you're working with, trying to find ways to empathize with their issues, understanding that the crying 3 year old who's not in daycare is in the other room because he wants to see daddy or mommy. These are difficult issues, and being able to exude empathy and compassion through this medium of technology is not easy. But as you point out, we're at a time where mental health is of great concern. Burnout, uh, isolation are all key issues here. And it's another reason why companies, whether they're working in hybrid or remote entirely, need to build a strategy of well being for their organizations. I'm very proud to be an ambassador for a company called Hinsa Performance, who built this as the cornerstone of their business, helping organizations provide well-being and assistance to their employees so that they can work as effectively as possible. So that's another line of discussion. But did you think of your question?
Yes, because that then, thank you for that, because that helped me easily get into the question, which is, So money doesn't create happiness, right? And you sort of all know that kind of line. But I think for company, it companies often don't tend to recognize that. And I'm coming from a service design and design thinking background.
Mm,
Qualitative information for me always outpaces quantitative, right? You say,
mm,
oh, quantitative is black and white, or it's 100 or 1,000. That's about it. But the qualitative aspect is more like the often the person. It's like, but why are you doing that? Why are
mm,
you happy or sad about buying this or not, using this or not, or leaving a company or not? So it seems to be way more important, yet way less measured and harder to represent in terms of financial value. Even so, there's an obvious connection, right?
mm,
So somewhere you say in the book, money doesn't start an idea, but an idea can start money, which seems to
mm,
go into the same area. So what's your view on the difference between, measuring things in money and output versus, well, hang on a second, there's a bunch of people, that's the organization that want to grow,
mm,
and that maybe should be the main outcome here.
mm. Well, I think we're talking about a couple of things here. The context of the statement in the book about, uh, money doesn't create ideas, ideas create money, came from my discussions crazily with George Soros in London, having breakfast with
Oh,
him the very
okay.
day, the morning after he made $1 billion by betting against the pound. And I was there to try to dig into his pockets to get money for projects we were just starting to do at the EBRD. And at the end of our breakfast, and he was very generous with his time, he kind of said to me, listen, you may or may not succeed because you're chasing money and you have some ideas, but I will succeed because I have ideas and I have money. And I walked away from that thinking, okay, if we have a good idea, we've got to sell that idea and the money will follow. And it did. And I went around to governments requesting, begging maybe, money for projects. So that was the idea behind that if you have a great idea and you're really passionate about it, the money will follow. And that's the basis for venture capital and everyone starting up a new business. The idea, however, that where does money and compensation come in with vis-a-vis satisfaction at work is an age-old discussion about hygiene factors and Maslow's pyramid. Uh, what I have found is that while we easily say money should not be important, it tends to be, and it's also very different culturally. In some cultures I worked with, the employees only cared about the money and not cared about all these other factors which we feel are so important: accountability, reliability, ownership, which is where we started this conversation back some minutes ago about the new generation and what's important to them, working for a purpose, and money is not so important. Um, this is a hard equation to balance. What we know is that people don't leave jobs because of money necessarily. They leave jobs for many, many other reasons, usually a bad boss, but also because they're not being satisfied in terms of fulfilling what they need to be happy. They don't have enough responsibility, they don't have enough ownership, they're not being listened to, and those aren't related to money. So it's important for leaders to understand that there's a certain basic level of compensation that people need for the position they're in and the market they're in. But there's so much more that's behind helping them become satisfied with what they're doing. Did I answer the question? I tried to give a careful view of it, but it's more than money to make people happy, to help people become happy at their work.
Great answer.
So we always have more questions than we have time. And I'm going to go completely off script here. Um, my grandparents gave me the gift of storytelling, all four of them. I was privileged to know four of my grandparents, three of my great grandparents. And sitting around at family dinners, they told the same stories. And every time they told it, it was slightly different. An embellishment here, a small change there. It wasn't lying, but it was just
Mhm.
making it better. But I've made a huge, great kind of passion out of telling stories, whether I'm telling stories in a marketing context or in a teaching context. And your book is filled with stories. Can you think of where you got the gift of storytelling?
That's a great question. Perhaps in the same way that you experienced, our family was very close. We all lived growing up very close to one another, both sets of grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins. And so around the table, there were stories as well. Uh, I also maybe, my dad was a teacher for parts of his life, and he was very good at sharing stories. Uh, and I also put it a little bit to my education. Uh, I was very fortunate to have a very good education where I focused on writing, uh, read a lot. It's strange because my degree is in engineering and applied science from Yale, but the things I remember most, because I never practiced as an engineer, what I remember most are the theater courses and the drama courses and the art courses and the literature courses that I took. Uh, so I think it's a combination of all those things. Uh, Lucky to be able to put thoughts on paper in a sometimes humorous way, hopefully as well, because the purpose of the book, in writing it, I was trying to entertain also, and I felt this is a kind of book that you could read one story at a time, or from beginning to end. Um, it's not just in paperback; it's an ebook, and I also narrated the audiobook. So, I was told, let's have the authentic author's voice. So I spent 2 days in a studio here in Helsinki, and it was great fun, very hard, great fun to do that. And so I guess I've been lucky to have all the combination of those backgrounds uh, that help me put things on paper that are interesting to read.
Lovely. Great answers. Thank you, Ken, for your times, your insight, your insights, and exactly those stories. It was lovely to have you. So I say thank you at this point, and thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for doing some research to give me some questions to work from, to think about. I appreciate that. And keep me informed where this goes from here in terms of publication and so on.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.